welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into something huge that's happening globally. This massive wave of protests, really driven by Gen Z. And our mission here isn't just to report the news, We want to give you the actual English vocabulary, the tools you need to talk about these big shifts from, say, Kathmandu all the way to Casablanca.
That's exactly it. We're seeing this incredible surge of protest, really fueled by frustrations that seem to be shared across borders, things like corruption, huge economic gaps.
Yeah, inequality.
Right, inequality, and just this deep lack of trust in the usual political systems. And like you said, this isn't just new. It's kind of a live lesson in the advanced English you need for these current affairs discussions.
Okay, so let's unpack this then. Where do we start? I guess with the term that seems to capture so much of the anger, right? This idea of Nepo kids.
Nepo kids. Yes. It's such a potent piece of language, isn't it?
Yeah.
It takes nepotism, that favoritism shown to family and relatives.
Especially in politics or business.
Exactly. And it just merges it with kids. It's simple, direct, and it instantly gets across that sense of unfairness.
It works so well because it gives a face to the problem, doesn't it?
Yeah.
A very visible target that, well, seems like they haven't really earned their position.
Precisely. For these young protesters, Nepo kids are the symbol of, unearned privilege. They represent the elite, the people who seem to get ahead just because of who their parents are, their connections, their fame. Not necessarily because of their own merit.
They start way ahead of everyone else.
Kind of feels like the system's built for them. And yeah, privilege is a key word here. They enjoy privilege most people just don't have access to.
And the power of the Nepo kid label is how visual it becomes.
Mm-hmm.
Like that story out of Nepal, right? This activist, Aditya, sees reports about a politician's daughter's wedding causing massive traffic jams for VIPs.
Right, that was the spark.
But then the image that went viral, this minister's son, Sagat Thapa, with this huge pile of luxury gifts, Louis Vuitton, Gucci, you name it. Suddenly, that abstract idea of privilege is right there, concrete. And it makes people angry.
Oh, absolutely. That visual contrast is so powerful. It shows the massive gap between the ruling elite.
Mm-hmm.
There's that word again, elite. We can use it as a noun for the group or an adjective and, everyone else. It really highlights how the priorities of the elites just seem miles away from the daily worries of Gen Z finding a job, getting basic services.
Different worlds, basically.
Pretty much.
Okay, so we've kind of put a name to the problem they're fighting.
Yeah.
But how are they fighting? It's Gen Z we're talking about. They grew up digital. So how does that change how they organize?
The digital side is... it's everything. It's the engine. And it's not just basic social media anymore. It's getting really sophisticated. We're seeing activists using things like generative AI strategically.
Wait, AI? To organize protests, that sounds like a completely different ballgame. How does that work?
It ramps up the speed and the scale massively. Take Nepal again. The government tries to crack down, nearly ban social media.
Okay.
And the activists just pivot. They use AI tools, ChatGPT, Grok, others to churn out like 50 different social media video clips slamming corruption, targeting the Nepo kids.
Like clicks, just like that.
Yeah, and not just generic stuff. We're talking potentially hundreds of tailored, high-quality bits of content, hitting specific angles, maybe localized, generated in minutes, way faster than any government can really track or respond effectively.
So the organizing is happening almost too fast to control. How does that speed affect things?
It keeps everything moving, constantly evolving. They handled TikTok, right? Using lots of different accounts, VPNs to get around blocks, calling themselves Gen Z rebels. Then you've got thousands using Discord, which started as a gaming chat platform, remember?
Yeah, for gamers.
Now it's being used for planning protest tactics, even suggesting who could be temporary leaders. And think about the Philippines, that lifestyle check thread on Reddit. That became a public space to demand accountability from the rich and powerful. It's decentralized, it's fast, and it builds consensus incredibly quickly.
Okay, this brings us right to the language, the English we need to actually talk about this stuff. All these actions, the anger, the organizing, the government responses, you need specific phrases to describe it clearly, right? More than just basic words.
Exactly. These aren't just filler words. They're crucial for showing cause and effect, for analyzing how these political situations develop. We can actually pull out 6 really useful phrases just from looking at how these events are being discussed.
All right, let's do it. Let's make it practical. So cause and effect first. If Gen Z feels like they're getting a raw deal, feeling shortchanged, what phrase links that feeling to their actions?
Okay, for that clear link between a cause and its outcome, you use as a result. Simple, direct. For instance, Gen Z feels shortchanged. As a result, they are skeptical towards liberal representative democracy.
Got it. Feeling leads to skepticism.
Hmm.
Now, what about the specific thing that kicks off a protest, like that awful situation with the women dying after C-sections in Morocco? How do we describe that trigger point?
Right, the catalyst. For that, you'd use sparked or triggered. They pinpoint the inciting incident. So, for Morocco, the recent protests were triggered by the deaths of several pregnant women.
Okay, so triggered by the deaths. But these protests often start small and then grow into something bigger, right? They change focus.
Yeah.
What phrase captures that kind of transformation?
Yeah, they evolve. For that change, that shift in focus, we use morphed into. It shows it becoming something different, usually bigger or more systemic. So a protest about one specific issue can expand. They quickly morphed into calls for systemic reform.
Right, moving beyond just one incident to challenging the whole system. Okay, what about when people like Aditya and his friends actually go out and protest physically, taking it offline?
Ah, the physical act. That's take to the streets. It describes that commitment, moving from online anger to being physically present. So, Aditya and his friends joined thousands to take to the streets of Kathmandu.
Take to the streets. Makes sense. And when a movement starts small but then really starts to catch on, drawing in more people, gaining influence across different groups, how do we talk about that growing power?
That growing strength and influence is captured by gain momentum. It shows the movement building power, becoming harder to ignore, you could say. When Gen Z's digital protests cut across class lines, they gain further momentum and power.
Okay, gain momentum. And the last one, what's the phrase governments often use when they're worried things are getting out of hand, becoming dangerous?
They often talk about the risk of protests spiraling into something negative, usually violence. It conveys that sense of escalating danger, things getting out of control, like governments warn there's a risk of protests spiraling into unacceptable violence.
Spiraling in. Okay, those 6 phrases as a result: spark triggered, morphed into, take to the streets, gain momentum, and spiral into. That's a really solid toolkit for discussing these events. Now, let's shift gears a bit to something, well, maybe unexpected, but really fascinating. This symbol that keeps popping up everywhere, skull and crossbones, but with a straw hat. What's that about?
Yeah, it's pretty striking, isn't it? It's straight out of the Japanese manga One Piece. This is the flag of the main character, Luffy. And it turns out Gen Z kids born roughly 97 to 2012, they grew up with this story.
The pirate story.
Exactly. Luffy's a pirate, but he's the hero. And who does he fight? He fights powerful, often corrupt elites and governments represented in the story by the Navy, the established power.
But isn't there a risk? Using a cartoon symbol for serious political protest. Could it make it seem less serious, like they're just playing games?
That's a fair question, but actually it seems to be working the other way. The symbol creates instant solidarity. It cuts through language barriers. You see that flag, you see the hashtag siblings trending.
Siblings.
Yeah.
Like Southeast Asian siblings.
Exactly. It connects protesters immediately. Indonesia, Philippines, Nepal, even places like Madagascar, Morocco. They don't need a long, complicated manifesto to understand each other. That flag is the manifesto, in a way. It signals we're fighting the same fight against corruption.
So the power comes from the story itself, the parallels.
Spot on. Protesters see the world of One Piece reflecting their reality. Huge gaps between rich and poor, poverty, and a system, the government or the Navy, that's supposed to be, but is often corrupt or self-serving. So they identify with the pirates, the outlaws, as the ones actually fighting for what's right. It's a very powerful narrative to tap into, and visually, it's instant.
Okay, so we've got the language tools, the digital tactics, this powerful symbol. But let's bring it back to the ground. These aren't just online arguments or symbols, are they? There are real consequences.
Absolutely not just symbolic. These protests have forced governments to react. We've seen them backtrack on unpopular policies like scrapping certain allowances. They've set up commissions to investigate corruption.
Yeah.
So there are tangible results. But it's crucial to remember the human cost, too. These movements often face brutal crackdowns. We're talking reports of, over 70 deaths in Nepal, 10 in Indonesia. The fight is very real and very dangerous.
Which leads to the big question, really. What does this all add up to? We see this incredibly effective, decentralized digital strategy. But can it lead to real, lasting, fundamental change? That's what observers are asking, right? Can movements built on algorithms and outrage actually reform systems?
That's the core tension, isn't it? The very thing that makes them strong, being leaderless, decentralized, hard to pin down or shut down, might also be a weakness when it comes to the long game. How do you
Right.
negotiate? How do you build a sustained political strategy without some kind of structure, some defined leadership or clear long-term demands? Previous movements often had figureheads, parties.
Right. But Gen Z seems wary of that.
Yeah.
There was that quote about them not wanting to worship leaders like gods.
Exactly. They saw how that played out for older generations, maybe how leaders got co-opted or became the new problem. So they're consciously avoiding that. It protects the movement in some ways. But the challenge then becomes, okay, you've disrupted the system. You've shown the anger. How do you translate that into institutional change that lasts after the hashtags stop trending? The digital tools let them scale the protests globally, incredibly fast, but maybe not scale the governance needed afterwards. That seems to be the hurdle.
A really profound challenge for this generation and for how politics works now. It's something we'll definitely be watching. We hope breaking down the language and the context today helps you follow it all with a bit more insight. Thanks so much for tuning in to this deep dive. If you found this useful, let us know. We'd love your feedback and tell us what other big topics or current events you'd like us to unpack next time. Keep digging deeper.